My name is Jason Furch with Astound, and today we're talking about all things mobile data. I'm joined today by Andrew Rucker, who has over 2 decades of telecom industry experience with over 17 years of experience in the mobile space. He's also worked at some of the largest mobile carriers in the US in various leadership positions. Today, Andrew is a senior director of sales for Astound and has been instrumental in launching Astound Mobile across its footprint. Thank you so much for taking your time and lending your expertise to today's conversation, Andrew.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So let's dive right into it. The first topic I'd like to discuss is understanding mobile data and activities that consume that data. And for our audience who might be a little bit newer to this topic, could you explain what mobile data actually is and how it might differ from Wi-Fi or traditional wired connections?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's start with the definition of data. I've often heard people, have difficulties distinguishing between what is data. So let's think of about it in this way. Very simply, we know what talking and texting is, and simply data is everything else. So think about those lifestyle activities when we're streaming our favorite movies, when we're navigating, when we are gaming, when we're listening to our favorite music videos. Those things are all data intensive. And when you get down to the distinction between Wi-Fi and mobile technology, well, the easiest way to distinguish between the two, think of Wi-Fi as being stationary, right? I'm at home, I'm in my basement, I'm watching a great Netflix movie. I'm not moving anywhere. Whereas with mobile data technology, if I'm driving in my car and I'm using navigation, I'm on the go. That is the distinction between the two. Now, they work together in a complementary way, but just think of Wi Fi as being stationary and think of mobile data technology as being on the go.
And when we talk about data, the evolution of technology. So today we're 5G is very widespread, and as that data has evolved, what impact has that had on how we use our phones, how we use our devices?
Yeah, I think it's been tremendous. This really started back with the introduction of the smartphone. I look at it this way: all content has gone to the internet, and now the internet has gone mobile. So essentially, we are taking these computers where we have access to everything, it's with us 24/7. So that's one thing. And then when you think about all the new technologies, all the innovation, all the apps, all the social media, things that we didn't have before, all of these things have come by way of having this innovation and this data consumption explosion. So it's been a tremendous impact on society.
I still remember the flip phones and the slide phones and trying to connect to the internet on them. As we've seen this shift in our usage, particularly with remote work and streaming and even gaming. I mean, the phones these days are so powerful. How has this evolution impacted that data consumption pattern? What should users really understand about, that new usage demand?
Well, I think it's really made things easier for us, right? Things that we couldn't do before, we're able to do that nowadays with our smartphones that uses mobile data. I mean, when you really think of things today, such as security systems, when you think of Ring doorbells, when you think of thermostats, and those things that we used to simply get up and walk to do it, we don't have to do that anymore. I know when I travel, I feel great about being on the road. And sometimes I forget to set my home alarm. But now I'm able to do that from my smartphone. And I may be, 1,000 miles away from home. When I want to monitor the perimeter of my house through my cameras, I can now do that stuff, via my mobile data. So there's some tremendous benefit to how it has made our lives easier. And it's fantastic. And I can't see what's next.
There's a lot of confusion around data roaming and your typical mobile data usage. Could you clarify the differentiation between those two, particularly for people who are traveling abroad?
Yeah, so that's the beauty of the innovation that I spoke about earlier. Nowadays, when you are able to travel outside of the country or say outside of your state, there's different options that you have in terms of being able to stay connected. I think the most important thing that we've arrived at is that we're able to stay connected. Nowadays, you don't have to worry about paying these exorbitant amounts of, for international calling, international roaming, through your data plans, you're able to really assess and being able to budget exactly what you think your expenses are going to be. So the nice thing about that, it's in front of you now. There's no surprises. It's there. It's predictable. So it's been had a tremendous impact on those things that you mentioned.
Now let's kind of talk a little bit about the types of mobile data usage. Could you walk us through some of these common activities that use that mobile data?
Think of it this way. We know what texting and talking is. That's where it all started. But everything beyond that that we do in our lifestyle really uses data. The most common things that we associate with that is gaming, right? We stream movies, we stream videos, we do distance learning from our phones. We do navigation. So if you're driving somewhere and you want to find that nearest gas station where you simply are able to go to your maps and navigation and find these things. So it really is everything. It's really pervasive. It's everything that we do today that goes beyond, talking and texting.
What makes some activities more data intensive than others?
Well, it depends on the usage, right? For example, gaming, right? There's a lot of graphics and things that, historically has used a lot of data. When we're having a continuous stream, for example, we just don't watch movies nowadays. We watch them in high definition. In those cases where we want higher quality of data, those things are great. They're there, but they also means that, they use a little bit more data than we are used to. Think about our audio, our music that we listen to nowadays. You can listen to radio in high definition, right? You have those options today. When you watch your favorite Netflix movies, you have an option. Do I want to watch it in standard high definite or high definition? Sometimes, you can even watch it in super high definition. So that's great. That just means that it requires a little bit more data. So those are the examples that come to mind for me.
Yeah, that gets me thinking. It's like if I'm watching a show on Netflix or something, uh, how many how many people are stopping after one episode, right?
Right.
So
Right.
are they binge watching 4 or 5 hours of content at high
Yeah.
definition? And many users don't realize that they have apps that are continuously consuming data. It might not be a lot, but over the aggregate of a month, it can compound. Can you explain some of the reasons why these apps need to continue to use that data?
Yeah, I think it's as simple as this. We need to be connected 24/7. We need to have access. I mentioned earlier about innovations. Things are constantly evolving in the data world to get better. There's more demand for things to be faster. So we need that to be updated. Sometimes when we're asleep at night, just because we're asleep, it doesn't mean our phones are asleep. But this is constantly evolving. It's dynamic, it's not static. So when we think about all those apps, the things that we use, sometimes we know we get up in the morning and we look at our interface on our Sirius Radio XM. It looks different than it did the day before. That's because as you were sleeping at night, it's being updated. And because, we want to make sure that we have the best and the brightest and, our network's the most reliable, it really requires that they continuously be updated. So those are the primary reasons.
One of the first things that I see whenever I'm comparing plans or looking at pricing, it's they have these categories. They like to bucket us into categories of a light user, a moderate user, a heavy user. For me as a consumer, I get a little confused by that. Could you help me make a little bit more sense?
Yep. Let me say that, Astound makes it easy. You can simply go to our website and we'll ask you a few questions about your lifestyle related to data. What do you use? How much do you use it? And we'll give you a pretty good recommendation of where you fall in terms of being a light user, a moderate user, or a heavy user. I think it's safe to say, that if I have one device versus a family that has five, probably that family that has five devices is probably going to use more data. But the easiest way, we make it easy for you to Astound Mobile. You just come over, enter some basic information, and get this as a bonus. If you're also interested in knowing about your savings and you happen to know how much you're paying on a monthly basis, you can also enter that information. And not only will we recommend what type of data plan you need, we can also give you a pretty good estimate on how much you'll be saving when you make that switch to Astound.
people really struggle to estimate those data needs. So using a tool like that would be very helpful. But beyond that, are there any other practical tips that would help someone kind of evaluate what their data usage should be?
Well, the first thing I would say is to, really think about what am I doing on a monthly basis? If I rarely use my phone beyond texting and talking and an occasional email, I can pretty much assume that I'm going to be a light user. Whereas if I have a family of 3, 4, or 5, and I know that my kids love things such as social media, or, they are accessing videos, or, they're listening to music, they're probably going to be more of the heavy users. And so some of that people know based on their habits. And what we can do, we make it easy through our tool that you can go out and kind of confirm what you already know. And we take it a step further. You can actually go into your account and you can see and measure what your data usage is. If there's changes that needs to be made, there's no penalty. If you need to add more data, you can. If you need to upgrade your plan, you can. If life events change and you need to go the other way and go from an unlimited plan to a by the gig plan, you can do that. So what's great about our value proposition is that we're easy, we're flexible, we're transparent. And if you have any questions about data usage or if there's any confusion, you can give us a call, you can go to our website, or you can simply go into your account and see that information as well. And finally, I'll say, look at our tutorials. There's some great information that we feel that we go above and beyond to make sure that, our consumers are educated about some of those nuances associated with mobile.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, we have at least 10 different support videos, a dozen plus articles around mobile to help you navigate through that entire process. And so, in your experience, what's one of the most surprising data usage patterns that people tend to underestimate? We've talked about video streaming and a few other things, but is there anything that kind of stands out in your mind?
Yeah, I think it goes back to people not understanding what's considered data. There's some false assumptions out there. And like I said, the easiest way to understand what is data, what is not data, is to simply put text and talk in one bucket and say everything else I do has to be data, right? So the good news is that the majority of what we do to now is data consumption. Our phones are always with us, we're always accessing the internet. We're always looking for information. We listen to music. So some of the common things that we do every day are really more of the data intensive, activities that consumers do nowadays.
So when we're talking about some of these data allowances, now obviously Astound has unlimited plans by the gig. We have 1.5 and 3. So what can users realistically do with that amount of data? Um, when they're trying to make their decision there.
Yeah, well, it really depends on their lifestyle. And what I always tell consumers is, start with what you think that you need. The nice part about Astound is that, unlike some of the competition, are no extra fees, change fees, upgrade fees. If you simply feel that you don't have enough data or it's too much, you can simply make that change, right? Very easily, very seamlessly. And I think that's some of the confusion because when you look at some of the competition and some of the things that they do nowadays, when you make those changes, you're kind of worried what happens. There's that mystery. There's not that transparency. But if you are a very very light user, or you think you're a light user, you can start there, right? And if you get mid month and say, "Oh my goodness, I'm approaching 1 gig or 3 gigs of data, I think I need to do something." Well, rest assured that you can do that. You do have permission to make changes freely, and that you're good to go.